Sociocultural theory or interpretation of language. As we try to evaluate the scope of sociocultural theory of language learning, we need to see what does it think of language, what role does it ascribe to language in the social world, and how does it explain the language system itself. So first of all, we need to keep in mind that sociocultural theory is a theory of learning in general. It is not a second language learning theory only. However, it has been successfully applied to the learning of the second language. So learning and within it, the role of language for the sociocultural theory is pivotal. It believes the language is the tool or the main mediating tool for thought and for making meaning of the world around us. So its position in all learning is central. The second thing that we need to keep in mind is that sociocultural theory is highly critical of transmission models of learning. That is, it rejects the idea that when we learn something, it is only a process of transmission from someone who is more able or more proficient to other people who don't bring any knowledge to the classroom or to the situation. Rather, it says all knowledge or all learning happens through a dialogical process. That is a process through within which dialogues are built, and within those dialogues, the knowledge of any kind, including second language knowledge, is co-constructed. So that means learners in the classroom are not passive, but they are active agents of their own learning. So this idea is central to the sociocultural theory. Another important aspect of the sociocultural theory is that it ascribes a lot of importance to the private speech. Now, private speech is the use of language that the learners use the language in terms of talking to themselves. When children are using the language to talk to themselves, we call it private speech. And when adults are using similarly the language, we call it inner speech. In any case, it is highly important, and the meta statements used in inner speech are said to actually research to prove that they help in regulating their own behavior. Now, what do we mean by meta statements? By meta statements, we mean that how the learners themselves give guidance to themselves. Like they say, first pay attention to this, then do this. If someone is saying this, then its meaning will be this. Like how they themselves tutor themselves. That tutoring language is called meta statements. Sociocultural theory, as we discussed before, rejects Chomskyan difference or distinction between performance and competence, and it believes language is a whole system which appears on a social plane and which is later on, through social interaction, internalized or taken in by the learners. However, a major limitation of the sociocultural theory is that it lacks a property theory of language. That is, it has not as yet explained the language as a system and what does it think of it. And it is quite understandable because it started off as a learning theory in general, and it has to be adapted for second language acquisition. Then there are several questions. For instance, what is the relative importance of pragmatic functions or the functional use of language, and grammar, meaning, what is the relationship between the form and meaning. Then, is language a creative system or is it a rule-governed system? What happens in the interlanguage? When the new learners come into this process of learning the language, do they pick up some prefabricated chunks of language that they hear? How do they process them? These are the questions that socio-cultural theory has not been able to answer as yet. And the primary cause of that is that as compared to other theories, there is still much more research that needs to be done with the use of this perspective.